The A24B Banshee was the land-based version of the Douglas Dauntless SBD-5 dive bomber. The Douglas Dauntless was the US Navy's primary dive bomber for the majority of the Second World War and saw service with a number of other Allied forces, including the Free French Air Force and Navy. Join me in this video as I build and review the Airfix plastic scale model kit of this slow yet deadly aircraft. Hello and welcome to Model Minutes. Today's video is a build and review of the Airfix Douglas Dauntless SBD kit in 1/72 scale. It comes with a choice of versions, either the earlier SBD-3 or later SBD-5 in US Navy service, or as the land-based version known as the A24B Banshee. Before we start the kit, as always, remember that adult supervision may be required due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. Airfix recommends this kit for those aged 8 years old and over. So let's take a look at the kit. Inside the box you get a bag of components, an A4 instruction booklet, an Airfix club leaflet and a set of water slide decals. There are a large number of decals which are well printed. These range from the wing roundels, cockpit instrument panel, various warnings and even the yellow stripes on the bombs. The instructions consist of an A4 booklet which contain information about the actual Douglas Dauntless, safety warnings and general information about how to read the instructions and prepare the parts for assembly. The instructions are reasonably clear to follow and highlight the variations for the different versions of the model kit. No paints are included, but all recommended Humbrol paints are annotated on the instructions, which benefits from being printed in colour. The parts of the model come contained within a clear plastic bag. Unlike the other models that I've built from Airfix on my channel, not all the parts are contained within a sprue. Instead, the larger parts, such as the wings and fuselage, come loose in the bag. Additional clear parts are included for the wing landing light and the cockpit canopy. The first step I chose to complete was to wash the plastic parts in warm soapy water. The instructions recommend you do this in order to remove any oil or grease left over from the moulding process. This will help give the cement and paints a better surface to stick to. Once clean, they were left to air dry. I didn't use any cloths as this can put dust or fibres on the model and spoil the finish. When the parts were completely dry, I then gave them a base coat with matte grey primer. This was sprayed onto the components in a sweeping motion in order to give an even coat. The reason I decided to do this was to give a good base for the acrylic Humbrol paints I was about to use. Having used the same paints on my P40B Warhawk, I had experienced difficulties with them sticking to the model correctly, and this base coat was an attempt to prevent this. The first thing to be assembled was the internal cockpit components. They were cut from the sprue with a scalpel and then cleaned up with a nail file. Throughout this kit, there will be areas of flash and burrs that need cleaning up. I did a bit of research and found that this is the original Airfix kit that dates back to 1967, but it has been reboxed with different decals a number of times. The age of the mouldings will become apparent as I progress through the build. Prior to applying cement, any paint in the areas to be glued will need to be removed. This will help create a strong bond between the two parts. The cockpit doesn't have a great deal of detail or parts, but does result in a sturdy construction. When the cockpit had been assembled, all the internal parts were painted with Humbrol 80 enamel as recommended by the instructions. I thin my enamel paints with white spirit as it's cheap and easy to source, but specialist thinners are available. I then progressed to painting the pilot and gunner figures. Using Humbrol 121 as the base colour, I'll later go on to pick out the details, using Humbrol 81 yellow for their life jackets, 29 brown for their hats and gloves, 11 silver for their goggles, and 33 black for their boots. I used Humbrol 61 as the flesh colour for their faces. Whilst these two parts were drying, I decided to paint the blades of the propeller Humbrol 33 matte black using an acrylic I had left over from a starter set. Whilst I was using this paint, I painted the other parts that required it, such as the wheels for the landing gear. It's at this stage I'd like to point out that it is possible to model the landing gear raised or lowered, and I've decided to model mine with the wheels down. Next, I cut the decals for the cockpit control panel from the main sheet and soaked it in water to remove it from the backing paper. I used Humbrol decal fix throughout this build to help settle the decals onto the surface of the model. The decal fix was brushed onto the model in the correct position. The decals were then slid off the backing paper and onto the right part. The decal fix will then help stick the decal to the part and make it look like it's painted on. The pilot and gunner were then added to their seats in the cockpit. I removed any paint from the areas that were to be cemented and then glued them into position. The engine assembly was the next thing to be built. The parts had already been painted in the correct colours, primarily Humbrol 80 for inside the engine cowling and 53 gunmetal grey for the radial engine. The parts were cut from the little sprues and any unwanted plastic removed. I had some fit issues with this part, and even more material had to be removed to make it fit properly. If you are careful with this step, the propeller can be made to turn freely, so be careful where you put that glue. Next, I prepared the areas where the cockpit were to be installed inside the fuselage halves. The cockpit assembly was then installed in the relevant position, using the moulded locating pins to help hold it in place. Having glued it into one side of the fuselage, the other half can then be cemented on top. The parts have to be held in position until they have set, so some tape or clothes pegs might be handy here. The engine assembly can then be added to the front of the fuselage, which fits reasonably well. Following this, the elevator components can be cemented in the correct position. I found them to be a little loose and would droop over time, so again these had to be held in position to maintain the correct angle. Following this, the upper and lower wing surfaces can be joined together. They align quite well, but you need to remember to install the clear landing light part before doing this, as it only goes in from the inside of the lower wing. The wings can then be added to the main body of the aircraft, and it fits okay, but does leave little gaps that you may choose to use a small amount of filler on. I decided they weren't too bad and might get hidden when it came time to paint. The landing gear is next to be assembled and installed. It doesn't consist of many parts and is reasonably simple to construct, but is lacking in detail. At this point you can see that there is no detail in the wheel wells at all, so this is something that could be scratch built or an aftermarket part sourced for. The bombs are then cut from the sprue and cemented together. There are 2 small bombs and 1 large one. They come in 3 parts, which consist of the 2 bomb halves and then the tailplane that slides over the end to hold it together. The mounts for the bombs were installed to the underside of the wing. They locate by holes in the wing, which might require a little cleaning out. Make sure you get these the right way round. At this point, the majority of construction is complete, and I felt it was time to start painting. I began by painting the lower surfaces of the model 129 grey, as I had that left over from the P40B Warhawk kit. It might be a little too dark, but I like the finish it gives. To get the best results with acrylic paints, they can be thinned with water, although specialist thinners are available. The reason the paint can be thinned is in order to avoid leaving brushstrokes on the finished model. Keeping the paint more fluid until it dries will result in fewer visible lines. My general rule of thumb is to start with the lightest colour first, then progress to the darker colours. I find that it's always easiest to paint a dark colour over a light one, rather than the other way round. The top surfaces and the bombs were then painted with Humbrol 155 olive drab as per the instructions. Whilst you watch me finish up painting the kit, I'll tell you a little more about the real Douglas Dauntless. The Douglas Dauntless SBD-3 was introduced to United States Naval Service in 1941, being derived from the earlier SBD-1 and 2 versions which were developed in the late 1930s. It featured an improved range and upgrades such as self-sealing fuel tanks. The main armament was 2 50 caliber machine guns in the nose and a single 30 caliber machine gun in a swiveling mount in the rear. This defensive armament was later upgraded to 2 30 caliber machine guns. The SBD-5 was an upgraded version of the SBD-3, and when used on land by various forces, it was known as the A24B Banshee. The Dauntless is well known as the primary dive bomber of the US Navy for the majority of the Pacific theatre during World War II, being responsible for sinking and damaging all the Japanese aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway in 1942. The Free French Air Force received the Dauntless in the version of the A24B Banshee, which they used after the D-Day landings in 1944 to chase and destroy the Axis forces that remained in France, whilst the majority of Allied might headed towards Berlin. The two versions Airfix provide decals for in this kit is either a Dauntless SBD-3 flying from the USS Enterprise at the Battle of Midway in 1942, or an A24B Banshee of the Free French Air Force of the group de chasse bombardement 118 Vendée in the south of France during 1944. It's this later version that I've decided to model. At this point, the majority of the painting is complete. Next, I applied a varnish coat over the top of the model. I used Humbrol 135, which is a satin varnish. A satin or gloss varnish should be used as the base for the application of decals, as this prevents the decals from appearing silvery and shiny on the model. The decals were soaked in warm water and then gently applied to the kit, which had already been given a coat of Humbrol Decal Fix solution in the relevant position. The decals are positioned and left to cure. The solution allows for the decals to conform to the complicated contours and details of the model, and it looks like they're painted on. Once applied to the model and you're happy with them, don't be tempted to move them around again, as the solution will make the decals very sticky and they could end up folded over or in the wrong place, and if this happens it's quite difficult to fix the problem. For more information on how to apply decals, I made a video on this topic, so I'll add the link below. The next step was to apply a further coat of matte varnish Humbrol 49 to the model, which ensures an even finish and helps blend the decals into the paint scheme. The cockpit canopy was then painted using the Humbrol 155 olive drab as used on the rest of the model. When it was dry, it was installed using a general purpose glue, as it won't react with the plastic and fog it up, which polycement has a habit of doing. The option to have a full canopy or with parts removed or open is included. I decided to depict the canopy as open so the figures could be viewed. I then picked out the panel lines with a fine marker pen to give them a bit of detail. The pen I'm using is water soluble, so can be removed if I make a mistake. I normally do this with a wash, but felt that due to the majority of raised rivets on this kit, rather than recessed details, a wash was not worth making. The final parts to be added were the bombs. A small amount of glue was applied and they were positioned in the correct places. They may need to be held in place to prevent them from drooping to one side as the cement sets. I decided to install the radio wires. I used my standard method of stretching the leftover sprue by heating it up over a candle and then drawing the two ends away from each other to make a really fine wire. Be super careful with this step. For more information on this method, I've got a video featuring this technique on my channel, so why not check it out? These fine wires were then cut to length and a small dot of polycement used to glue them in the correct place on the model. They were then painted grey to blend them into the model. Humbrol 11 Silver was then dry brushed over the model to give it a light metallic effect and highlight the details. I removed the majority of the paint off of the paintbrush onto a paper towel. Then, with the residual paint, I brushed it over the model and only the raised details will collect the silver paint and make them look slightly chipped, as if revealing the bare metal underneath. And that's as far as I went with the construction of this A24B Banshee model kit. And here are the finished results. I found it didn't take too long to complete, and realistically the kit can be constructed in about 6 hours. It's quite easy to build, but perhaps a little fiddly at times due to some of the small parts. It does fit together well despite this. As this is an old kit from Airfix, however, it lacks the fine detail and mould quality of their more recent offerings. It's let down by the lack of detail, particularly in the cockpit and wheel wells, and is missing some details externally too, such as the engine exhausts and nose machine guns. There are also some fit issues, quite noticeably where the canopy joins the fuselage. The modern decals and good instructions help make up for this, but there was something I discovered after I built this kit and was doing a little research. The stripes on the tail of the plane are actually in the wrong order. They should be the other way around, which is quite a big miss on the part of the Airfix research and development team in my opinion. This could be rectified by painting them on, but as I've already applied them, I'd have to get a new set of tail numbers too. Despite these failings, this was still a fun kit to build and I would certainly recommend it, until, of course, a newer version becomes available. The kit was retailing at the time of purchase for £8 in the United Kingdom, which I think is a little expensive, but fortunately I managed to get it on sale for half that price. If I were to build it again, I'd paint it in the other US Navy version and maybe build it into a diorama. This kit has been available in different decal versions over the years, but the moulds have remained virtually unchanged since 1967. At the time of this video, the kit was out of production, but perhaps stocks may remain with other retailers and on the second-hand market. I'll add the link to the kit on the Airfix website below so that you can check if they're manufacturing it again. I'm not particularly impressed with this kit from Airfix, but I can appreciate its place in the history of scale model development, representing a time before modern 3D design softwares and computer-controlled machines. It's still a fun kit to build, and the overall result is a fairly convincing Douglas Dauntless or A24 Banshee. As always, let me know what you think of my build, techniques and finished model in the comments below. I'm also keen to hear your suggestions as to other kits that you'd like to see me build on my channel, so feel free to post that too. All that's left to say is thanks for watching this video and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe in order to see more content and help support the channel, and feel free to share this video with your family and friends, and you can connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. See you all again next time.